Hey everybody! So I was recently talking to a friend of the channel, and they had a few questions about comic-related terms, mainly to help them know what they were getting when purchasing books online. And after talking with them, I thought perhaps it would be a good idea to lay it out there for anyone who's into comics but might not know just how they're organized or formatted. So comics or comic books is the most commonly used term when referring to sequential art, which I believe is the best term for it. Because when someone says comics, there's a part of people's mind that automatically thinks of comic strips and the funny pages. And that is no longer an accurate representation. That's just comics in its infancy and most simplistic. Sequential art covers everything from Western comics to Eastern manga, from film storyboarding to the funny pages. It's all consecutive panels of art telling a narrative. The term was coined by comic artist Will Eisner in his 1985 book, Comics and Sequential Art. I recommend that to anyone interested in cartooning and the actual art medium behind the stories. A single-issue comic book is usually sold as a pamphlet, or what some call a staple, based on how it's bound. There's usually about 24 to 32 pages. Anything bigger than that, like your annuals, your giant size, your 100-page spectaculars, or the 48 to 64-page prestige format books that DC's been putting out, they're all square bound, which I'll talk about more in a moment. So as the lengths of comics grew, so did the depth of the narrative that could be explored. And this gave way to the graphic novel, a longer and typically self-contained story as opposed to the pamphlets of an ongoing series. Because these are usually a complete story, they get a little bit more production value, like hardcovers with dust jackets, like the famed Killing Joke, for example. And I say typically self-contained because there have been sequels and even trilogies of graphic novels within the same setting, and those are most commonly released years apart. Now let's talk about different types of series. There's the ongoing series, which is the most common form of comic book. These are the pamphlets that have been the same connected stories that have been running concurrently since the title's original launch. Things like Amazing Spider-Man, which is in like the 800s, or Batman, which I think has passed 1,000 issues. Ongoing series have no planned end in sight. They are constructed in a way that builds upon itself. As one arc of the story comes to a close, it opens the door to the next. Then there are two types of limited series, mini and maxi series. It sounds kind of self-explanatory, but a mini series is usually less than 6 issues and tells a complete story. And that is it. A prime example, Wolverine and the Punisher, a 3-issue miniseries that was released once monthly until completion. Maxi series typically run over 6 issues. Take The Dark Knights of Steel, set to be a 12-issue series, for example. But I'd also put something like The Death of Doctor Strange into the maxi category. Even though the main title will only have presumably 5 issues and will make it a mini-series, adding the tie-ins will bring the collected volume to over 10. Speaking of, collected editions are usually sold as TPBs, trade paperbacks, or as a digest. A digest is a collected edition that is reprinted at a smaller scale than originally released. They are usually like a 4x5 to fit better on a bookshelf. Think of these as VHS home videos. Remember the ones that said, "This film has been modified from its original version. It has been formatted to fit your TV." That means that they took something filmed in a wider aspect ratio, let's say like today's standard 16:9, and they cropped it down to a 4:3 to fit the more common household CRT televisions of the time. No fluff, no extras, a simple and narrowed view of the story. That is a digest. Whereas trade paperbacks are square-bound editions that collect and reprint limited series or even story arcs from ongoing runs into bound volumes in their original scale. I know a lot of comic collectors that prefer to wait for the trades because they usually present the entire story at once rather than monthly or bi-monthly as originally released, and for the bonuses. Because trade paperbacks often contain additional material not available in the original pamphlets, like introductions, forewords, or even concept art. I always think of these like the special features of a Blu-ray or a DVD, because in my opinion, trade paperbacks are the way to go. They are often cheaper in the long run, they are far more convenient to read and store, and they have the extras that I mentioned before. They're also not limited to just collecting specific stories. They can also collect the works of a single artist or a writer's run on a title. I mean, say for instance you'd like to collect, or hell, just even read some of the original action or detective comics that gave us Superman, Batman, and the classic comic tropes that we know today. The average person could not afford to buy original printings of any of those early issues, but you could pick up a trade or a collected edition of any of those stories and keep them alive. These are just a few things to keep in mind to anyone out there looking to start a series or a collection. Hope it helps. Take care.